Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we are going to begin Torah study with the Parsha. I want to look at one little piece about the Parsha, and then I have a surprise for you, and we're going to switch to a different text. So guess where we are? That's right, we're in Leviticus. We are in that wonderful part of Leviticus called Tazria Metzora, talking about the laws of what used to be translated as leprosy, but we know is not leprosy, probably something more akin to psoriasis. And it's treated very seriously by the Israelite cultic community. It was a very serious business to become made impure by tzara'at, this disease tzara'at. So this is taken very seriously by the biblical folk. It was considered a very serious kind of impurity, and the person who was diagnosed with it is diagnosed by the priest. The priest does not treat it. The priest simply identifies it as tzara'at. Only the priest can diagnose it as tzara'at, and then all of the things that go into effect once the priest says this is tzara'at, this person is impure. So then we have we've discussed over the years, all of the many ways that the person is dealt with and then is brought back into the community, because the priest continues to check on the person and continues to decide whether or not they need another 7 days, or if it looks like they are ready to be put through the rituals of bringing them back into the community and purification. So the tzara'at is understood to be something that is on the skin. It is also something that can be on cloth, and it can be on the walls of a home. So probably for them, what looked like tzara'at on the skin could look similar to mold or something on the cloth, and same mold or mildew on the house. So probably for them, it was a manifestation in different ways of the same problem, and all were to be dealt with the same way. Okay, so they're all impure, and then there's different ways to deal with all of that. So we're just going to start this, and then I want to look at a little commentary, and then we're going to move. So here we get the beginning of kind of diagnosing this business. Any person, when there is on the skin of their body a swelling or a scab or a shiny spot, and it becomes on the skin of their body an affliction of tzara'at, or bisaro, in the skin of his flesh. What is it called? Nega, this Hebrew word nega, tzara'at. So it is the affliction, the plague of tzara'at. Okay? So we've got a bunch of terminology here, which we don't really usually focus on when I do this parsha. I usually give a long lecture about tameh and tahor and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to do that today. Go listen to previous years. But a bunch of words here that for the commentary and for anthropology become very important in looking at what's going on. Or with an ayin, not an aleph. So this word here in Hebrew, the b means in, so or, ayin vav resh. Or with an ayin, not an aleph, is skin. Or with an aleph is what? Light. Exactly. All right, so or with an ayin is skin. For the rabbis, you have to keep in mind that sounds the same as or light. You have to. That's too delicious for them to pass up. Most people were not studying on a handout. They were studying orally with a teacher. So when they hear or, they don't know which one it is until it's clarified. So for the rabbis, that's just too good, right? Light and skin. All right. So in the skin of the flesh, nega, this term, nun gimel ayin, nega, is plague, or it's translated here, affliction. Okay. Now, what's interesting, something the tradition does, I taught this one year, but what the tradition does with this is the priest determines whether it's tzara'at by looking, by examining. If you read this word backwards, if you read nega backwards, what is it? Or not just backwards. If you mix up these letters, the lamed just means as. So the letters we're dealing with are nun, gimel, ayin, nega. If you mix them up, you get ayin, nun, gimel. What is ayin, nun, gimel? Oneg. What is oneg? Joy, pleasure. So the rabbis comment, how do we determine whether it's nega or oneg? It's about our perspective. Just as the priest diagnoses it as a nega by looking and examining, that's how we decide if something nega or oneg. And it could be either one. It's up to how we see it, how we perceive it. Okay. So a beautiful play on this, on these terms. All right. So then the person shall be brought to Aharon, HaKohen, Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons who are also priests. Here we go with the word to see. V'ra'ah HaKohen et hanega. The priest sees or looks at the nega, be'or habasar, in the skin of the flesh, and looks to see the se'ar ba'nega, if there's hair in the nega that's turned white, and the look of the nega amok is deeper me'or basaro than the skin of the flesh. Nega tzara'atu. It is diagnosed as the plague of tzara'at. Okay. And vatime oto. The priest declares him impure. The person is not impure until the priest declares them impure, which is a very interesting thing, right? Like, I don't know, it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat or something. Like, it's not the tzara'at itself that makes the person tameh. It's the priest's diagnosis of it as tzara'at that now the person is declared tameh, which is, but you had cancer, whether or not they diagnosed it. Mm-hmm. You still had cancer, but you weren't tameh until it's diagnosed. We would say nothing changes about the patient. The patient is terminal before and after the diagnosis. That's a good metaphor. The patient is terminal. They just don't know they're terminal. This person is not tameh until the priest declares it tzara'at and declares them tameh. So anything they've touched until that moment is not tameh. So it's just it's a fascinating concept that he's not terminal until the priest declares him terminal.
But if you didn't go to
a priest and you didn't know you had it, then you wouldn't be tameh, I guess, right? So yeah, maybe level of infectiousness, Richard is suggesting. Not sure. Right? Okay. So for Ahu HaKohen Bayom HaShvi'i, and so again, this verb to look, to see, the Kohen looks again in 7 days, right, to see if the nega is still there, right? Ba'or, on the skin. And then if it's not, clearing up, then it's another 7 days that the person is rendered impure. V'ra'ah HaKohen oto, and the priest looks at him, examines him, like looks closely. So all of this is the person is not neglected. The person is separated, but the priest himself comes and continues to examine the patient. They are not like left, to come to the doctor. We have to schlep a terminally ill patient to a doctor. The doctor comes to the patient. The priest, who's the only one who can deal with the diagnosis, comes to the patient to look closely at them. All right. So this goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on, right? More swelling on the skin, the patch of live flesh, tzara'at noshenet. So this is a mature tzara'at be'or basaro, in the skin of his flesh, right? So all of this stuff, again, the priest is looking, the priest is the one diagnosing, and then whether he's declared tameh or tahor, we go on for more diagnosis. Okay. And this is a boil, right? So we go on and on with how this is diagnosed. And then we go to, there's a burn on the skin, right? Now, what if that's red, but there's white, and there's a hair that's turned white and the shiny spot. So on and on and on and on. And then the head or the beard, right? We have the same, now we have how to diagnose tzara'at there. And then we get balding. So conditions that could cause one to go bald that have some kind of something that looks like like a nega, affliction, right? Okay. We did this last year, I think, that they cry out, I'm impure, I'm impure. We talked about that it's really not about anything other than contact with other humans and how we need that and want that. And that's why it's so tragic that somebody is calling out, I am tameh, because it's about relationship. All right, so here we have the cloth, right? So if the affliction has spread on the cloth or on the woof or on the warp or on the skin for whatever might be done with the skin for work, the affliction is acute sara'at, it is tameh, it is to be burned, the cloth or the woof or the warp in the wool or in the linen or in any vessel of skin that has in it any affliction. It is acute sara'at, in fire it is to be burned, okay? So if sara'at is diagnosed on cloth or some kind of like wine skin or something, it is to be burned, right? So this is now going to cloth. Then we're going to get to what happens when it's on a house. Okay. What I'd like to do is just go here to this piece. Okay. I just want to, so first of all, they have this piece by Alan Sherman. So I grew up listening to my father's Alan Sherman albums, and Alan Sherman has a piece. He says, you gotta have skin. All you really need is skin. Skin's the thing that if you got it outside, it helps keep your insides in. It covers your nose, and it wraps around your toes. And inside it, you put lemon meringue. Outside, you hang your clothes. All right, so this is Alan Sherman talking about the importance of skin. And so our author is going to quotes Rachel Adler, who is a student of Dame Mary Douglas, who wrote Purity and Danger, Leviticus as literature, and is an anthropologist and takes an anthropologist's perspective. I want to look at just this interesting way of holding. This whole article is very interesting. But this idea of nega, I never really put it together this way, the way this article does. All right. Nega, plague, right? Nega, that we kept looking at, that you can mix it up and be oneg. But also, so it appears in chapter 13. We were just in chapter 13, 40 times. Typically translated as plague, derives from the Hebrew word root nun gimel ayin, to touch. Our skin, our first line of human defense and of vulnerability, is also our means of experiencing and reaching out to other people. So kind of to Richard's point, so infectiousness happens because we touch each other, right? So we're exposed to what's on other people's skin because we touch people and are touched by people. We get negaim, plagues, because we are creatures of touch, because our boundaries necessarily abut those of others, because our very skin serves as an invitation and a host to others. The teeming repetition of the word nega in this chapter itself serves as a kind of verbal representation of the ubiquity of touch and contact. We are touched all over, all the time, physically, emotionally, our skin serving as a kind of synecdoche for our very selves. So take that in for a second, right? We are touched all the time, physically, emotionally, with our skin serving really as us. It's what defines world and us is our skin, because it keeps us in, right? So that's skin is what is is the differentiation between us and world, us and other. Similar observances can be made about the Hebrew word or. So that's why we looked at that word this morning, which means skin, and which appears 40 times in this chapter in its different senses of human skin or leather. Because leather is what? The skin of an animal. The word skin, or, recalls the verb le'orer, to arouse, to wake oneself up, lehit orer, right? The heat pa'el, the reflexive form of that verb. If le'orer is to wake up, then lehit orer is to wake oneself up. And to comment, leha'ir, presumably in response to something said by someone else. Our skin, through its interface with others, is a site of continual awakening and interaction. Like, how do we tell what kind of weather there is? Like, our skin registers so many things about what's happening in the world. So I never thought about the fact that it is related to the word to arouse, to wake up oneself, and to reflect, to comment on something someone else says, leha'ir. Even more striking is the relationship between the word basar. Remember, it was a nega, or habasar, right? In the skin of his flesh. Another word that proliferates throughout Leviticus 13, and the Hebrew verb to announce or proclaim, levaser, used in the Bible most often not in a neutral sense, but of proclaiming good or bad news. We proclaim or send tidings, bisorot, by mouth. One of several openings in the skin. To be a herald, a mevaser, is not, you've heard the place Mevatzeret Zion in Israel, is not just to be one who proclaims, but one who brings the first news of something new, who stands at the very borderline between sadness and joy. For example, we read in Isaiah, how beautiful upon the mountains, Raglei Mevaser, the feet of the messenger of good tidings announcing peace. Mevaser Tov, the messenger, the harbinger of good tidings announcing Yeshua, salvation. Here, the same root, bet shin resh, that is used over and over again in Leviticus 13 to mark a pathological breach in one's skin, is used to suggest a happy turn of fate, a moment not of desolation, but of redemption. So for me, what was interesting about this article, you are free to read it at your leisure, is that I never really paid attention to the ways that all of these descriptions of tzara'at, whether it's nega or basar, have all of these positive connotations in Hebrew. And so it's a very interesting thing that the nega, the plague, it comes from touch. Well, sure, because that's how you spread a plague, is by touch, right? But in general, we don't see touch as something bad. And actually, it's usually something hopefully good. Or the sense of skin being about arousal, awakening. So anyway, it was an interesting thing to me to put all of these terminologies from this text about tzara'at into context in terms of its appearance in the rest of Hebrew. Betsy?
Is that the same spelling of meat, basar, meat? Or is
Yes.
That's the same? So same
Yes.
with basar.
So it doesn't matter whether it's human or animal. We are meat. It's like one time the dog was laying on Eliana. She was laying between me and Eliana, and Eliana was maybe 4 or 5. And so Olivia is laying between us, and her head is on my lap, and her tush is by Ellie, and Ellie goes, "How come I always get the dark meat?" And I was like, "Oh, really? The dark meat, Bert?"
There's a whole thing about touch even today and touching other people. That, the whole idea of being touched when you didn't ask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which doesn't just relate to how women feel sometimes about men touching them, but sometimes men feel about, there's some people who are very, very touchy-feely. You see them and they totally want to touch you and hug you. And there's people for whom that's okay. There's people for whom that's not okay. But
Right.
Touch is regarded as something very intimate.
Right.
I think.
Right. Whether we intend it or not. Right.
Right. Whether we intend it or not. And I guess it differs by individual people how they feel about being touched. And now, particularly if we talk about the Orthodox and the more traditional sense, who touches whom and how and when and what skin is exposed and not exposed becomes really important.
Yep, negi'ah, touch. So that's the halacha, that's the law around not touching is negi'ah, which I've said this before, but I'll say it again. At Yeshiva High School, negi'ah we observed negi'ah, so boys and girls did not touch. And I have to say that it was pretty freeing. Mm-hmm. It was pretty freeing to know that that people weren't just not going to just come touch you. That we were shomer negi'ah, we were observant of negi'ah, touch.
I think it also means observant of the space of others. That when you touch somebody in a way, you're invading their space that is private. And when you touch somebody, somehow you've converted their personal space to something that you have a part of.
Right, that you're entitled to.
Want it or not.
Right. Yes.
And it just, this whole notion of skin also, to me, it speaks of boundaries. There's sort of
Yes.
starting from separating, everything's getting separated.
Yes.
There's always a border, and skin is our border.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's really interesting to me that is such a focus.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in order to organize a world into a way of thinking, you need ways to define.
And yes, and along those lines in this article, the Mary Douglas of it all, it's hitting on exactly what you're saying. Here it is. Societies dread invasion, disintegration, and inundation. Hence, the extremities and borders of our nations and our bodies are loci of concern, places where integrity might be breached and order overthrown. Human skin is a long, continuous boundary that demarcates the most basic of borders, the border between the human body and the world outside it. Breaches in the skin, such as those of Tzara'at, are attacks on the body's wholeness. They leave the raw flesh vulnerable to the external world or display flesh taken over by external. Just like you said. So you're already there. All right, Rachel?
Yeah. Who was that who was just speaking before you, Rabbi?
That was Lisa Rosenbaum.
Lisa Rosenbaum. That was brilliant. And that made me think of, that was brilliant. Because I've always been confused about why this is such a big deal in terms of making the holy space somehow, kind of, dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems like, I don't know, you just made it click for me in my brain, because it's all of a sudden you see something that comes from like some otherworldly place, something like that's supposed to be contained within its boundary has burst through and broken through its boundary and come out into the place where it's not supposed to be.
Right. And or something from the outside breached your barrier.
Right. Yeah.
It breached your boundary that's supposed to be permeable.
Right. Whether it's on a wall of whether it's on a home or on like some other surface, a textile, or whether it's on skin. Now that connection, I could never make that connection before. So right. Lisa, you're brilliant.
So in this article, it talks about skin is our boundary, like me and the world. Then what's next is clothing, right? We put something over the skin to protect and keep the skin, with integrity, whatever I'm trying to say. And so if something happens to that, that's our next boundary. And then after that, we clothe our family in a home. Our skin shelters us, our clothing shelters our skin, and the home shelters our family. So all of those are boundaries, and if any of them are violated, then it's a serious concern that, like you said, it made me also go, oh, right, of course. Why wouldn't they take that very seriously? I know, I know. I really liked it. So that's why I brought it for you. But we're going to leave Tzara'at. I'm assuming as Judith or Betsy say what they need to say.
Go ahead, Judith. I'll go after you. You're mute.
I have an Orthodox Jewish dermatologist, and he wanted to check me for skin cancers. And I said, no. He said, why? I said, because I can't let you touch me. He said, we have exceptions. Doctors have exemptions. I said, yes, but I don't. I just felt so uncomfortable with a Jewish Orthodox man touching me. And that was my boundary, but have to understand the exceptions to those boundaries.
Right.
What is without the boundary?
Rabbis also don't ask. We just move in for the hug.
Yeah.
We really don't ask. We just hug. Betsy?
I was just talking about the boundaries reminds me of with kashrut and all the fences. It seems similar, because my question, well, why can't you mix that with that? It doesn't. There's no connection, but it's all about the creating more and more boundaries so you don't make a mistake. Again.
Right. More protection so you don't violate the original injunction.
Yeah.
Of, a calf and its mother's milk. Okay. So what are we going to spend time on if I'm not going to spend any more time on Sarah? What is today? Today is Yom HaZikaron. Today is the day of remembrance for all of those who fell defending the state of Israel. And at sunset, we switch from Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut. So at sunset, we switch from Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance, to the celebration of Israel's independence. So it's a very Jewish thing that you can't celebrate independence until you acknowledge all of the people who sacrificed the ultimate sacrifice of their own lives for that day, July 4th, to happen. So it's very Jewish. We don't just do July 4th. July 3rd would be Memorial Day, and July 4th would be Independence Day. And so it makes very much sense to me as a Jew. So we're in Yom HaZikaron, approaching tonight the beginning of Yom HaAtzmaut, the day of celebrating the etzem, the selfhood of Israel. So we just talked about the selfhood of the person with tzara'at and the breaching of that. Now we're going to talk about etzem, the selfhood, atzmaut, the selfness of Eretz Yisrael. And so what we're going to look at as our Torah text for this morning is, we're going to get to this later. We're not there yet. We're going to look at the text of Hatikvah, because I realized a lot of us know how to sing it, but we don't know what the heck it means. Exactly. We know something about what it means, right? So, all right. So here is the text of Hatikvah. So for those of you who know it, it will look familiar. But we don't, like I said, we don't really spend a lot of time seeing what it means. This is the first 2 stanzas of a 9-stanza poem. The first 2 stanzas became the official Zionist anthem. It did not become the official anthem of Israel until 2004. It's written in the late 1800s. The 9-stanza poem is written by a Zionist, and we'll look a little bit about that, in the late 1800s. And it evolves into what Zionists sang. And at the first Zionist Congress in, I think it was 33 or 38, I can't remember, this becomes like kind of the part of, the official Zionist movement's anthem. What is it? What is it saying? These first 2 stanzas of this poem. So this rhymes on purpose. Kol od balev pnima nefesh Yehudi homia. Right? So this is poetry. Ulfate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia od lo avda tikvatenu hatikva bat shnot alpayim liyot am chofshi be'artzenu eres Tzion b'Yerushalayim. So it's poetic Hebrew. It is old Hebrew, not biblical, but not modern. Because remember, Hebrew in the late 1800s is not being spoken. It's not a living language, really. Only Hebraists are learning it, or you're doing shiurim, you're doing, sacred literature, you're doing Torah study and Talmud study and Mishnah and all of that in Hebrew, but often the classes would be taught in Yiddish. So Hebrew was kind of a stilted, just starting to become a language from antiquity having been resurrected. So people who are working on it, I'm not saying they're not already working on it, but the Hebrew is not yet yummy. You know what I mean? Like it's a little stilted. As long as balevav pnima, the pnima is interior, inner. Levav, this is a fancy word for lev, heart. As long as there is in the inner heart, nefesh Yehudi, a Jewish soul, homiyah, yearning or longing, ulefa'ate mizrach, kadima, looking eastward and further, kadima, further, ayin letzion, an eye towards Zion, Sophia, focused, like on Zion, od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not yet lost. So as long as within the Jewish heart and soul, essentially, there is an eye yearning and looking towards Zion, our hope is not yet lost. It's not a separate statement, right? Like it's a continuation of the first thought. the way our hope is not lost is as long as we turn our attention towards Zion, which is why it was called Zionism, right? And yearn and long for, right, Zion. Odlo avda tikvatenu, then our hope is not yet lost. What hope? Hatikvah bat shnot alpayim, the hope that is 2,000 years old. Lihiyot am chofshi, to be a free nation, a free people, be'artzenu, in our land. Eretz Zion, in case it is unclear. What land? Eretz Zion, the land of Zion, V'Yerushalayim, and Jerusalem. Because at one of those Zionist World Congresses, there was a majority vote to accept the offer to build a Jewish state where? In Uganda. This was the anthem sung by the people who resisted and said, absolutely not. Our hope is not lost as long as we have our attention turned towards Zion, that we will be a free Am be'artzenu, in our land, not their land, not Uganda. Where? Eretz Zion, the land of Zion, Yerushalayim, and of course, the special focus on Jerusalem. Okay. So if you go to things like My Jewish Learning, yes, where it says download a printable version of the lyrics in Hebrew, English, and transliterated Hebrew here. Here we go. So 1897, the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland, the delegates joined in a rousing rendition of the song Hatikvah, the beloved Zionist hymn, right, would become the national anthem, but not until 2004. It began its life in Hebrew as a 9-stanza poem entitled Our Hope, Tikvatenu. Its author was a colorful 19th century Hebrew poet, Naftali Herz Imber, who hailed from a town I cannot pronounce in Austro-Hungarian Galicia. Okay. So he writes this poem. He works as the personal secretary and Hebrew tutor to Sir Lawrence Oliphant, an eccentric British author, politician, world traveler, and Christian Zionist, right? And so he brings forward this poem, Tikvatenu. By the time Imber left Palestine in 1888, his poem had become a song, renamed Hatikvah, Hebrew for the hope. Thanks to the early Zionist pioneers in the Jewish farming community of Rishon LeZion, the melody arrived courtesy of a Romanian Jewish immigrant named Samuel Cohen, who adapted it from a Moldavian folk song, Karol Kuboi, Cart and Oxen, and it spreads rapidly among Jewish pioneers. Because you have such an amazing rabbi.
Pânce, electricitate, căi ferate și vapori, încă nu erau aflate, mergeau toate fără zor, căci bătrânii erau moi, erau ca voi, păișcea, 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 păișcea.
Okay, so that's the Romanian folk song melody that Samuel Cohen brings as an immigrant from Eastern Europe. And the Zionists put the first 2 stanzas of the 9-stanza poem to that melody, because a lot of Eastern European Jews would have known it, would have known that melody. And remember, these were not religious Zionists. These were secular Zionists, many of them, right? They're socialists. So they take from the people. They take music from the people. Who were their people? Eastern European peoples, right? That's who they lived among. All right. So they take it and they put it to the melody I just played for you. But folks didn't love it, right? So Herzl hated it, and it turns out held several international competitions, all ultimately unsuccessful, to produce a serious alternative. He didn't like Imber, who was this bohemian guy who died of alcoholism in the New York slums. Despite his personal talent, he was a ne'er-do-well, as described by this article. A vagabond, a drunkard. Okay, so So part of the problem is who brought it forward, the composer of the lyrics. For other early Zionists, it was not the author of Hatikvah, but the non-Jewish origin of the melody that proved objectionable. That makes sense, right? So if you're at all attached to the tradition, you want a Jewish melody, not a Romanian melody, right, from a bunch of socialists, right? And then many Zionist cultural figures were unnerved by the song's strong resemblance to Czech composer, I can't even say the name, Moldau section of his 1874 symphonic tone poem, Mavlas. All right. As a solution, some Jewish composers wrote new melodies for Imber's words. Notice they did not take, right? Recent scholarship has elaborated on the idea of the wandering melody, isolating a centuries-old melodic pattern common to many Central European songs, the most famous of which is Mozart's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Of course, Hatikvah is far from unique as a national anthem in sharing its melody with other, quote, foreign sources. For instance, the tune of God Save the Queen served at various times as the national anthem of Australia, Canada, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, Russia, the United States, and several German states, along with several other countries, past and present. I did not know that. So religious Zionists, of course, are going to object terribly, right? They're going to be seriously disturbed. Because who's not mentioned in it? Of course, God. So Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook composed a parallel poem instead of Hatikvah, the faith, ha'emunah. The hope. He writes the faith, but it did not take. So Hatikvah was sung at the annual Zionist congresses and other political events around the world. In 1933, at the 18th Zionist Congress, the song was officially adopted as the movement's anthem, together with the now familiar blue and white flag. So now I want to look at this piece by Rosenberg. And Rosenberg talks about that it was not obvious, because we just read the history. So now we know he's right. It's not obvious that Hatikvah would be the Israeli national anthem. There were other competitors, right? And very many critiques of the poem written by Imber. Among those was a voice from at least some religious Zionists, right, who thought it was too secular. And some advocated instead for Psalm 126, Shir Hamalot, as the national anthem. So those of us who are used to benching after a meal, if it's Shabbos, you start the benching with Shir Hamalot, B'shuv Adonai, et Shivat Zion Ayinu Kechomim. So this is Psalm 126. Okay, so that's how you start benching if it's Shabbos. So some folks thought, well, that should be the national anthem. We were like dreamers, right? When God restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like dreamers. So he's suggesting, Rosenberg, that there's a connection to this idea of being, like the psalmist says, like dreamers in this business of Hatikvah. The two poems cast their gaze in completely different directions, though. Shir Hamalot is a song of thanksgiving. That is a rejoicing over good that has occurred in the past. When God restored, we were like dreamers. Our mouth was filled with laughter, right? We were like dreamers, not because our deepest hopes remained unfulfilled, such that we were dreaming of a messianic future, but precisely because those dreams had indeed been fulfilled. And we were stunned by the sense that reality now felt like a dream. Hatikvah, by contrast, is a song not of celebration, but of yearning. This is very powerful. For those of us who are deeply concerned about Israel and her future, who are deeply concerned about what's happening in Israel with this government, who are deeply concerned about democracy in Israel and here, I love this. This was a really important teaching for me this year. It's not a song of celebration, but of yearning. Right. Our hope is not yet lost. Hatikvah expresses a hope for that which is not yet manifest. This makes sense given that the poem predates the founding of the state and was informally at least the anthem of the Zionist movement before it took on that role for the state of Israel. But it's stunning to think about this as the anthem of a state that actually exists. We are not singing that all of our hopes and dreams have been fulfilled, but rather that they are not lost, that we hope for even better days and more complete fulfillment. The critical line here, our hope is not yet lost, is not an out-of-whole-cloth production of Imber's poetic mind, but actually an allusion to a biblical verse. So he didn't make it up. Our hope is not yet lost. He didn't make that up. He's a Jewish poet. He knew a text from Torah that he's playing with to say Zionism is what's keeping us from having our hope being lost, because in the Bible, Yechezkel criticizes the people who are not coming back to rebuild Israel. God said to me, mortal, these bones are the entire house of Israel. Dry bones, you know the dry bones? That's Ezekiel. That's his prophecy. Dry bones. Behold, they say, our bones have dried out. Our hope is lost. We are doomed. Ve'avda tikvatenu. Our hope is lost. Imber writes, as long as our eyes turn towards Zion, od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope is not yet lost. Right? We, Israel, have lost our faith. Our hope is lost and do not believe that we can be restored to the Holy Land. That's what Ezekiel's talking about. When the Jews don't come back and don't want to rebuild the temple and all that stuff, it's like, well, because you've lost your faith that it's possible. And if you do that, our hope, we're doomed. We're dried bones. We're desiccated. We've dried up. Avda tikvatenu. Our hope is gone and we are doomed. Imber is saying, we're not doomed. Our hope is not yet lost as long as we face Zion. So then tying this to Tzara'at, see what I'm doing here? Beit Yaakov points out that the image of the dried bones is intentional. The highest form of ritual impurity is tum'at meit. The tum'ah, being tameh, impure, that's communicated by a dead body. The Beit Yaakov says that the reason dead bodies impart such a high level of impurity is precisely because the dead have literally no hope. Impurity is the ritual consequence of hopelessness. To be alive means to recognize always the potential for more. The recognition that we can move in the direction of redemption, even if in the present moment we are nothing but dried up. I'll add terrified, but in this sense, Hatikvah is, whether Imber intended this or not, a deeply pious and humble national anthem. It is a recognition that the central theological command God gives the Jewish people is never to accept that our current state, no matter how degraded or decrepit, dooms us. When we sing Hatikvah, we are responding to God's critique of those Jews who lost faith in Yechezkel's day. We are not yet singing Shir HaMalot, celebrating the culmination of all that God has decreed for us. But unlike the Jews to whom Yechezkel was preaching, we know that however hard this moment might be, however it might feel like we are nothing but dry bones, hope is not lost. Hope can never be lost. That is a national anthem that truly embodies the Jewish spirit. Shabbat Shalom, people, as we move into Kaddish time on this Yom HaZikaron, and tomorrow have a Yom HaAtzmaut Sameach, a happy Yom HaAtzmaut.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.